Hi, so I should have a presentation. I don't know if they appeared by magic. Yes, the magic is working, excellent. And now I have that test that everyone else had. So I'm going to address the first question only about what a minister from a developed country would do, because I'm not an expert on developing countries, but I'm going to reframe it as what I would advise the minister to do. And what I'm going to talk about follows on from what Niels especially, but also Carlotta to some degree was saying about development. And so I'm going to talk about how we can help refugees assimilate into their host country. And I'm thinking here mainly of the benefit to them, but as was also alluded to by the earlier panelists, I think successful integration of the refugees actually makes public opinion more favorably inclined to refugees. So first let's talk about how potentially refugees and everyone else whom I'm calling economic migrants, because I think family reunification is a form really of economic migration as well, usually. But they may have very different characteristics. And for both groups, actually, it's often the origin country is a major determinant of, for example, the education and their skills in general. And so for the refugees, so the economic immigrants to any given country are usually from several origin countries. And the refugees, there's usually a wave from a particular country. So right now, for example, from Syria, although of course, as has been pointed out, the Afghans and Somalis are an ongoing large stream. And so that implies a particular level of education. And which could be higher or lower than the host country. But refugees have some disadvantages compared to other immigrants. So firstly, it's more likely to be a random sample in terms of age, whereas, as has been said by earlier speakers, economic migrants tend to be younger, and we know from the literature that the younger people are when they arrive in the country, the more rapidly and successfully they integrate into the country. They didn't know in advance they were going to move, so if you're going to move for economic reasons, in some cases you prepared yourself for the move. The classic example actually would be Filipino nurses who study nursing in the Philippines in order to move to the US. And so refugees are, all else equal, less likely to speak the language of the origin country. They probably have worse networks in the host country as well. Often economic migrants are joining people from that they know, either relatives or people from their area. Refugees may be able to do that to some extent, perhaps not as well. And we know that networks are very important for finding jobs. And then it's only been alluded to a little bit, but almost by definition, refugees have experienced trauma, and that's going to affect them negatively and possibly also in terms of integration. And I'm going to be focusing on integration in the labor market, but this could impede them there as well. So let's go to the empirical literature. So refugees struggle at first, we're going to find, but the final outcomes really vary by origin country, which is what we would have expected. And what I'm going to show you are some results from a very nice paper by Bratsberg and some co-authors about Norway. There's some very viewer-friendly graphs in here. And what they do is they compare the labor market assimilation of refugee arrivals, different ones, so different waves. So there was one wave of asylum seeker arrivals in Norway was the end of the 80s, and they were from a mixture of countries: Chile, Iran, Somalia, Sri Lanka, and Vietnam. Then there was another wave at the beginning of the 90s from the wars in ex-Yugoslavia, so Bosnians and then later the Kosovars. And then my ability to, all right. And then at the end of the 90s, from two distinct places, Iraq and Somalia. Now, I don't have time to tell you about this, but in the same paper, they also looked at different arrivals of of people who are coming mainly to join family members and people who are coming mainly for economic purposes. And so if you look here, you'll see I focused on getting a job, and the year that we're talking about is on the x-axis. And on the y-axis here, this is the share of people who are working. So 1 is 100% and 0.2 is 20%. And these small dots here, those are natives, very high employment rates in Norway. I'm showing you men first, and I'm going to show you women. And this yellow here, as you can see by the fact that it starts early, that's the wave of refugees who came from that big mix of countries. This gray one are the people from ex-Yugoslavia, and then this red one are the people from Iraq and Somalia. And what you can see, I'm not actually sure why this group looks so good at the beginning, but you can see that in general, the groups start off with low employment rates. Wouldn't be that surprising, because a refugee would not generally have lined up a job in advance like an economic immigrant might have done. And they have these worse networks, probably. And you can see that there's a phase where there's a very rapid rise in the share that employed, but you can see that sort of the final outcome really varies a lot by the origin country. So if you look at the people from the ex-Yugoslavia, which is going to be the country that's most similar, or not a country, ex-country, most similar to Norway, you can see they actually get up basically to the native level. It looks like the recessions hurt them more than the natives, and they've diverged a little bit. At the other extreme, you see that after some years of progress, the people from Iraq and Somalia just really flattened out at about 20 percentage points lower employment rate. So that's a really big difference. And then this mix of countries, as you might imagine, is somewhere in between the two other extremes. This it's a little bit hard to learn from because Iraq and Somalia, of course, are very different from one another as well. Now, I'll go on the next slide and show you the women. What's rather interesting about the women is that the mixed group and the ex-Yugoslav group look very similar relative to natives, as is the case in this diagram, but you'll see that the Iraqis and the Somalis have much lower employment rates. That's probably partly to do with the choice to participate in the labor market. It's probably not that they have very high unemployment rates, although I don't have those numbers. So here's that. The women's employment rate in Norway is also high, so it's about 90%. The ex-Yugoslavs essentially catch up, although they have a bad Great Recession. The gap actually for the mixed groups not quite as big as for the men, but the gap is much bigger for the Iraqis and the Somalis. Now in their paper they actually have this also for wages, so for the ex-Yugoslavs, although they look essentially the same in employment, they are earning less than the Norwegians. And they also show for the receipt of transfers from the government. Now, of course, at the beginning, they're all getting a lot of transfers due to their status as refugees. Interestingly, then that goes away for a while, but then what happens as the refugees get older is that they have a larger probability of going on to disability than the natives do. So let me get to the lessons I've been giving you, well, not really evidence, but a description of what's happening. So from the general immigration literature, and this is not from a refugee-specific literature because there really isn't one due to a lack of data, although data is now being gathered in Germany, which is very exciting. But from the general literature, we know that language is really important for immigrant success in the labor market, both in terms of wages and employment. And so the first lesson is begin teaching the language and along with it cultural matters right away. And if you essentially immediately for groups that you're pretty sure are going to actually receive a favorable decision on their asylum request. And actually Germany is doing that with the Syrians. They're teaching them German right away, even though not all of them have had their cases adjudicated. So that's something that's going to be very important. You probably can't start teaching German to everybody right away, although it's unlikely that many people would move to Germany just for free German lessons, but it's probably not that costly to do. The second lesson is help the refugees to search for a job early. So now I'm combining lessons with lessons from the unemployment literature. We know that employers dislike applicants who are long-term unemployed. Now, how would they view exactly refugees? They're long-term non-employed, probably, or at least it's unlikely they've worked for a while. You don't want to prolong that if you want employers to be enthusiastic about them. Another thing that we know, back to the immigration literature, is that actually your foreign experience is of no value in your new country. And really surprisingly, that seems to even be true, or to be close to true, if you have British experience and you move to Canada. In Canada, they're not interested for mysterious reasons about your British experience. It's more easy to guess, though, that German employers are maybe thinking that the Syrian labor market or equipment or practices are different, and so they don't put much weight on that. So immigrants in general have to start sort of at the bottom in terms of experience, even if they have education. So what are the practical steps that this implies? Well, one is, and this is echoing exactly what you said, don't bar the asylum seekers for working for very long. Probably you do have to do it if there were no period at all. That's essentially saying there's free migration, free temporary migration to Germany. So if you don't want to do that, you need some period where the asylum seekers can't work, but it really should be the minimum, so 3 months, which some countries do have, but it can be up to a year in some European countries. That will be very detrimental to the labor market prospects of the refugees. Provide them help for search with a permanent job search, but do try to focus on not all methods of helping people actually work, so do look at methods that have been evaluated and that seem to work. Some countries focus on this. It's actually of secondary importance to the experience problem, but there's also a bit of a problem recognizing your educational qualifications from abroad. It's not nearly as important as experience, but so you need some help. You need to help, and again, I know Germany is aware of this. I'm not sure about other countries in getting those credentials recognized. And so here's it's not a big innovation, but my slightly new idea is consider giving refugees unpaid internships, just so that they can have something on their CV that says, I was in a, say, German employer, and I sort of saw what was going on there. I have some idea of how things work. And perhaps even if necessary, the government could give a little bit of money to the company. I think for public opinion reasons, these can't be sort of long-term subsidized jobs. The public might not be happy about that. But I think firms might be willing to let people come for, say, 3 months and try at least just to get even an idea of how a firm works in the host country. And so, and then another corollary of that, and though I've made it its own lesson, is make the asylum decisions rapid, although I should emphasize conditional on quality. I don't mean rush through and give random, scores. And the reason here is that employers like applicants who are going to stay. It depends a bit on the job. If it's an industry where it's really high turnover and the natives only stay 2 months, it doesn't really matter. But that's less the case anyway in Europe than, say, in the US. But you want to remove, the employers don't want to have uncertainty about who's actually going to be able to stay. Okay? So you need to make quick decisions. There may be some trade-off between giving temporary protection and real asylum, in that countries that give temporary protection seem to be willing to give that more quickly and with less evidence. And since quick is good, but certain is good, and so there may be some tension between those two that I don't quite know how to resolve. So the fourth lesson, and here I admit to venturing outside my true expertise, but presumably many of these people, if not all of them, actually need psychological counseling. They've experienced trauma in the home country. The psychological literature suggests that that's especially likely to affect the children. And so what do I know about this as an economist? Not that much, but there is an interesting literature that some economists have been carrying out in the US, which is in a different context. It's from preventing youths from committing crimes. But what has been shown to be successful is to have some psychologists develop a cognitive behavioral therapy program that can be administered in groups by non-psychologists. So it's not a one-on-one with a very expensive psychologist. It's actually administered by an NGO. And so I wonder if something, but here I have to admit, because I'm outside my area, for all I know this is already being done, but perhaps someone else can speak to that. But this seems like an important aspect. And I'm still thinking as a labor economist, if you're to function well in the labor market, other things need to be going well as well. So that's it.